Yippee-ki-pee!
Hey guys, we're here with the second video review of the newly revealed Journey to Un'Goro cards. You can check out the description box below for the list of cards reviewed in this video. First we'll discuss the Shaman Quest, Unite the Murlocs, which requires us to summon 10 Murlocs for the grand reward of Megafin. Ever since GVG, Blizzard has been toying around with the idea of a Murloc Shaman deck with cards like Siltfin Spirit Walker, Call in the Finishers, and
Everything is awesome!
in this expansion, they have decided to double down on it by providing Shaman with a Murloc quest. We were expecting Paladin to get this quest while Shaman gets the Elementals one, so it is a nice surprise to see the devs trying to push for a third Shaman archetype besides the Jays and Elementals. So how good is the Shaman quest? Although on the surface summoning 10 Murlocs seems difficult, it is actually not that bad. Shaman has a spell Call in the Finishers that can summon 4 Murlocs, and Finja the Flying Star can summon 2 more if he attacks and survives. That by itself is 6 Murlocs summoned, 7 including Finja, so all of a sudden the quest seems doable. How about Megafin? Is he worth it? Obviously an 8/8 body for 5 mana is really powerful, but the nice thing about Megafin is that his battle cry works really well in the context of a Murloc deck. Murloc decks tend to be swarmy at the beginning and run out of gas fast, so Megafin can refill your tank just when you're about to run out of cards. Will this deck be viable? It doesn't seem to have a broken mechanic that can compete with unfair archetypes in the current meta like Jays or Kazakus, and the fact that we have to skip turn 1 in a deck that is all about flooding the board is a big tempo loss against tempo decks. Also, every Fin is Awesome is rotating out right when the card could have achieved its true potential. With all that being said, Murlocs have a soft spot in our hearts, and we are hopeful that the deck will see some play in the new meta. Primalfin Murloc is the Gorilla Bot of Murlocs. Just like Gorilla Bot, it costs 1 more mana than its stats and has the slight disadvantage over other Discover cards that its battle cry is conditional, in this case having a Murloc in play. This card should be decent in a Murloc heavy deck like the Shaman Murloc Quest deck, where its battle cry can be reliably triggered and it can provide you with 2 Murlocs and 1 card to satisfy the quest. Hydrologist is the new Paladin Murloc card that has the battle cry of discovering a Paladin secret. As was mentioned before, Discover cards typically cost more mana than their stats, but Hydrologist does not lose any stats for its effect. In that sense, it's in line with Dark Peddler, a tier 1 card that saw play in every Warlock deck imaginable. What made Dark Peddler very strong though is that 1 mana Warlock cards like PO, Flame Imp, Voidwalker, and Soulfire are some of the strongest in the game, and you had a high chance of finding one among your 3 choices. Hydrologist, on the other hand, is limited to discovering Paladin secrets, which are considered on average inferior to your average 1 mana card. So the card is not Dark Peddler good, but it's still a solid card that gives you a free extra card in your hand without diluting your deck with crappy secrets, and through the Discover mechanic allows you to adapt to the current board state. The question then is, where will this card fit? It's still not clear what Paladin decks will be viable in the new meta. None of the Paladin cards revealed so far are deck defining, and the current Buffadin archetype is a tier 4 deck according to Tempo Storm. It is also doubtful that we'll have a competitive Paladin Murloc deck in the new meta, especially with the rotation of the 2 best Paladin Murloc cards, Anything Can Happen and Murloc Knight. So without seeing the rest of the Paladin cards, including the Paladin Quest, we can safely say the card is very solid and waiting for a place to call home. The last Murloc-related card revealed so far is Gentle Megasaur. Unlike the Druid Adapt card, Verdant Lawnneck, Gentle Megasaur is actually really good. In a sense, it's similar to Enhanso Mechano in that it's a 4 mana card that gives your board some kind of buff. The problem with Enhanso Mechano was that the buffs were random and unreliable. It is severely understated for its mana cost. A 3/2 body is that of a 2 mana card, and the card costs 4. Gentle Megasaur, on the other hand, is statted competitively like a vanilla 4 mana card, so playing it on an empty board is not too bad. Also, the fact that you can pick the enhancement based on your current board state makes it much more reliable than Enhanso Mechano. You can either go the aggressive route with Wind Fury or +3 attack, or the more defensive route with Divine Shield, +3 health, Taunt, or Death Rattle. Gentle Megasaur should be a great addition to Murloc heavy decks. Switching from Murlocs to Elementals, a couple of them were revealed recently, starting with Glacial Shard. Glacial Shard is a 1 mana 2/1 neutral elemental with the battle cry of Freeze an Enemy. In that sense, it's like a 1 mana version of Frost Elemental. Frost Elemental does not see much play on ladder, except in a recent version of Reno Lock where it was used as a tech card. The problems with Frost Elemental are A. It's too expensive for 6 mana. B. It's losing 3 stat points for its effect. A vanilla Boulder Fist Ogre has 6/7 worth of stats. Glacial Shard, on the other hand, does not lose any stats for its mana cost, and it's a very cheap card. If we look at its cost, the freezing spell, Freezing Potion, costs 0 mana, and a 2/1 minion costs about 1 mana, so at first glance the card seems like it's statted fairly. Remember though that bundling 2 cards into one is a lot better because it empties up a slot in our deck and allows us to do more in the game with less resources. Glacial Shard is an obvious auto-include in elemental decks, but it is also viable in other decks as a cheap 1-mana tempo card. Kalimos Primal Lord is the new insanely good Shaman legendary and the avatar of Hearthstone. For 8 mana, we are getting a 7/7 body with a crazy effect. Basically, we get to choose one of 4 elemental invocations: air that deals 3 damage to all enemy minions, earth that fills your board with 1/1 elementals, water that restores 12 health, and fire that does 6 damage. I've read this concise description on Hearthstone, which is pretty funny and spot on. It's like pick your choice of Abyssal Enforcer 2.0, Onyxia 2.0, Antique Healbot 2.0, and Nightblade 2.0. Out of all the choices, fire is probably the weakest effect because it's limited to face damage, whereas air's AoE is the strongest. As we've seen in Druid before, choosing one of 2 effects is very strong, and Kalimos gives you 4 good choices to choose from. Are you facing lethal? Pick water for the heal. Did your board just get wiped out? Earth will refill it with its cheap 1/1s. Are you facing a huge board? How about a mini flame strike? And if you just need that final bit of damage to finish the game, fire is your friend. This card is super cool and exciting, and we can't wait to try it out in the Elemental Shaman deck. The final elemental related card is Tol'vir Stoneshaper, a 4-mana 3/5 that gains Taunt and Divine Shield if you play an elemental the turn before. Ascension with Divine Shield is pretty darn good, but if you do not trigger the effect, you are left with a lousy 3/5 vanilla body for 4 mana. There are little nuances in the card worth discussing. The fact that it's a 4 mana and requires an elemental the turn before can be quite tricky, because if you have a good 3 mana elemental like Tard Creeper in your deck, and you didn't draw it on turn 3, then do you forfeit tempo by playing a 1 or 2 mana elemental card to trigger this guy's battle cry next turn? Or do you play on curve for tempo instead? Also, the fact that he is not an elemental means that a turn 5 that gets a benefit from playing an elemental the turn before won't be triggered. It is these little micro decisions and strategies you need to take that make the elemental tribe so interesting. The next card is the Hunter Quest card, the Marsh Queen, which requires you to play 7 1-cost minions before you get Queen Carnassa. Queen Carnassa is a 5 mana 8/8 that shuffles 15 raptors into your deck, and each one of these is a 3/2 that draws a card when played. It feels like Blizzard is embracing the Hunter's hero power and aggro nature this time around by providing it with a Zerg Rush type of quest. Although on the surface the quest seems super aggressive, it does require you to play the 1-attack minions from hand to count towards the quest, so the 1/1 that is summoned by Alley Cat or the 1/1 hounds from Unleash the Hounds do not count. Realistically, with playing the quest on turn 1, it will take you around 5 or 6 turns to fulfill the quest if your hand is filled with 1-attack minions, and the next turn after that to play Queen Carnassa, so the Zerg Rush starts piling up around turn 7. In that sense, this deck does not seem to be as aggressive and oppressing as the pirate decks of Gadgetzan that kill you by turn 4 or 5. Interesting to know that the Hunter only has 3 class-specific 1-mana cards including Alley Cat, Fiery Bat, and Timberwolf, so it will have to rely on neutral 1-mana cards to complete the quest. What comes to mind is the newly revealed Firefly Elemental that provides you with 2 1-mana minions in 1 card, and Glacial Shard, a very good 1-mana tempo card. What's cool about this quest is that you can try to go about it the more aggressive route by packing your deck with 1-mana minions to fulfill the quest as fast as possible, or a more mid-rangey route that takes it slower and uses Houndmasters and spells. Another interesting interaction with this deck is the Tundra Rhino, which can set up for an OTK in combination with the 3/2 Raptors created by Queen Carnassa. Another Hunter card revealed by Blizzard is Tol'vir Warden, which draws 2 1-cost minions from the deck. When we first saw this card before the quest was revealed, we were a little confused as to what purpose would a card like this serve in Hunter, but now seeing the quest, it's obviously tailored towards the Hunter quest archetype. So a 5-cost 3/5 that draws 2 cards is really good, considering Azure Drake was a 4/4 that drew 1 card. Granted, these 2 cards are very specific, but one can argue that it's better in this case because you're getting what you want rather than a random card from your deck. This card is definitely meant for a more mid-rangey type of hunter deck that plays a slow 3/5 on turn 5 without advancing the quest forward. The Rogue quest is the most interesting one in the game so far, but we will talk about it in a sec right after we look at the new Rogue spell, Mimic Pod, which for 3 mana draws a card and puts a copy of it in your hand. Compare that to Thistle Tea, which for 6 mana draws a card and puts 2 copies of it in your hand. Mimic Pod is much better than Thistle Tea because it charges you a cost of 1.5 mana per card drawn, whereas Thistle Tea charges you 2 mana per card. Also, the fact that it's cheaper makes it more efficient to play without losing too much tempo. In a way, it's comparable to Arcane Intellect that draws 2 cards from your deck. Which of these 2 spells is better? It really depends on the situation. Arcane Intellect is better for combo decks that are trying to cycle through their deck as fast as possible to get all the combo pieces. On the other hand, Mimic Pod is better for value-driven decks that want to generate more value from their cards. It can also provide you with some combinations that weren't possible, like getting an extra Eviscerate or Cold Blood that your opponent wasn't expecting. Also, the fact that it draws 1 less card from your deck means that you will fatigue 1 turn later if you're planning for the long game. So yeah, Mimic Pod is a really good card that will most likely see play. Now back to the Rogue quest, the Caverns Below, which requires us to play 4 minions with the same name and it rewards us with Crystal Core. Crystal Core is a 5 mana ability that sets our minions to 5/5 for the rest of the game. The keyword here is play, not summon, so if a minion is summoned from our deck using Dirty Rat, for example, it will not count towards the quest. How do we play 4 minions with the same name when we can have a maximum of 2 minions of each type in our deck? Well, that's where cards like Mimic Pod and Thistle Tea come into play. These cards can create duplicates of other cards in your deck when you draw them. You can also use the bounce mechanic in the game to play the same card multiple times with cards like Youthful Brewmaster, Shadow Step, and Gadget Sam Ferryman. Or you can use Vanish and return the cards to your hand and play them again. One card that would have been really good for this quest is Gang Up, but unfortunately it's rotating out of standard. This is one of those quests that is really difficult to evaluate before seeing it in action because it uses such a unique mechanic that we've never seen before. Our initial gut feeling is that it will be too inconsistent to be competitive. Like what if we use Thistle Tea or Mimic Pod and draw a spell? That will not help us with the quest because it wants us to play minions, not spells. Or suppose we played and bounced back a Novice Engineer, but the second copy of it was the last card in our deck. As far as the reward goes, Crystal Core sets all our minions to 5/5 for the rest of the game, so our 12/12 Edwin Van Cleef when played will be a 5/5, and on the other side of the spectrum, the Sheep from a Polymorph will be set to a 5/5. Blizzard said that it was a funny interaction during playtesting to try to hex one of those 5/5 minions and end up with a 5/5 frog. It seems desirable in this type of deck to play smaller minions to get the benefit of the boost, but with high-tempo games, sometimes you have to play your minions on curve to not fall too far behind. If you have to play your third and last copy of a minion that you have no way to bounce it back, that could throw a wrench into your plan to fulfill the quest. The reward from the quest is fair and not broken, and it seems that Blizzard has learned a valuable lesson from the broken Jade mechanic to put a cap on minion growth.